course, there's a plethora of terms to describe this strange animal of the global economy that we're living in, and the meltdown that we've just seen. Credit crunch, recession, depression, fusion economics, global meltdown, mortgage-backed securities, carbon footprints, collateralized debt obligations. Do we really know what that means? Quantitative easing, which apparently is now the next step once central banks have removed all of their other options for reducing interest rates, credit default swaps. What do they all mean? And obviously none of us can understand them all. Until now, unfortunately, though, we've all been sort of willing to let the economists take charge and let the politicians listen to the economists and say, well, you know, they're economists, they're politicians, they're going to do the right thing. But as a journalist in The Economist once said, that politicians will only act economically literate when the electorates are economically literate. So the idea is that we all need to become economically literate. The problem is that economists explain everything with numbers and graphs, and to sort of see what happened, you know, after the subprime meltdown that Stephen mentioned, you know, leading to this credit crisis, which then led to a global recession, sort of then started feeding back on itself, because you had other countries then going into recession, buying less products from the United States, job losses all across the board, not just in the United States. Warren Buffett once said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming naked. And what we've seen in the last few months, you know, an enormous amount of naked swimming. Perfect example is the AIG story. You know, and there's another brilliant writer from the New York Times named Joan Nocera, who wrote a brilliant article describing what exactly happened with AIG. And it is amazing that they were able to go to London outside the sort of arm of the regulatory agencies in the United States and essentially issue insurance policies for securities that banks then paid for, so that they knew that if ever these subprime debt obligations were ever to fail, that AIG would pay for them. And so AIG, this group in London, essentially made $400 billion of naked insurance policies, but they didn't call them insurance policies. They called them collateralized debt. No, sorry, even I'm confused here on the words. Credit default swaps. There we go. And so what we have is, you know, is sort of a lack of knowledge that allowed governments, allowed regulatory agencies, and even the economists have said that they don't really know what's going on. When you look at what Madoff was able to get away with in a country where theoretically the regulatory agencies should have been overseeing it. And then you know, you look at Latin America, where basically the countries I spend a lot of time in Brazil, as Joanne mentioned, where they've done basically everything right. In the last few years, you know, large current account surpluses. The middle class in Brazil is opposite of what's happening in the United States, and it's not unconnected. The middle class in Brazil has been growing very strongly. For the first time under the Lula government, you have more than 50% of the population is now in the middle class, or was before this global meltdown started. What happened in Brazil is that people pulled out of Brazil because they needed money to cover their debts in the United States. They sold their Brazilian securities and their Brazilian investments. They then turned those into dollars, which made the real go down. And you ended up with a sort of a feedback, a bit like if I were to talk into this microphone very loudly and they were to turn it up back there. You would have this feedback of countries, a global meltdown in the United States leading to a meltdown in Brazil, leading to a meltdown in China, leading to a meltdown in other parts of the world. So, you know, the idea of the book is, you know, try to find out how do we understand what went on. And obviously we're not economists, so we're not going to use the same models that economists use, even assuming that they would be appropriate. You know, obviously if the economists had done everything right, they would have predicted what happened. So my idea is that let's do a what-if sort of experiment here today and look at maybe two or three other models and see maybe how we can use other ways of looking at just what happened to try to make sense of it all.